Dolapo is a property investor. She's been in this business for a little over 10 years. Probably some of you may have seen her on Homes Under the Hammer, right? And she is the founder of Citygates Property Development Limited. Dolapo, thank you so much for joining us today. It's such a huge pleasure and honor to have you. But let's start by asking you the one important question: why property of all things to go into?
So it's funny, I always say that I wasn't accidental. You hear about people that were accidental landlords. No, I actually sought property out. And I would say I have to attribute that to my family upbringing. My dad was really into property back home in Nigeria. And so when I came here, I already had a mindset to be looking into property investing. So it wasn't that I just, sort of stumbled on it. I knew that I wanted to go into property investing, but I always thought it was going to be a side hustle. I always thought it was going to be something that was going to just accompany my day job, because I had a full-time job in the city and I was happy with it. But once I got the property bug, I realized this was my calling. Like, everything about property. In fact, the thing I always say is that property kind of meets you where you are. It's almost like if you want to go big, you can go big. If you want to keep it simple, you can keep it simple. Property just works. So for me, it works for me. It works with my lifestyle. It works with. So it's funny that when I started, I actually thought there was just one track. And a lot of people that are in property actually will say that they always thought it was going to be in one direction. But as you get into it, you start realizing that there's so many ways to monetize and so many ways to create income from property, such that this is why we're having this webinar today, because a lot of these different strategies are things that I've sometimes stumbled on, and some of them are some that I actually learned about. So, and that's why I'm here today. So.
And that's fantastic. So, well, over to you. What do you have for us this evening?
Okay, so first of all, I wanted to say that, I've been in this game for a while, and I'm going to talk about my story. One of the reasons why I thought this webinar, and really I have to say thank you to you guys for hosting this property webinar and this property masterclass. It's so critical for this time. We're talking about people sort of finding financial freedom and finding other alternatives to their source of income. I always talk about something called the single income risk, where you just have that one job, it's paying your bills, and that's all well and good. But as we now know, we've seen the risk with that. And so side hustles are now a thing everybody knows about. Now, for me, property represents one of the easier side hustles to get into. I know there's complexities, and definitely as you get into property investing, you're talking large sums of money, but there are other strategies that sort of meet you, like I say, where you are. So if you have bad credit, there's strategies for that. If you have good credit, amazing. So my whole thing about today is to really just talk you through the different strategies that exist. And so you can think about which one of them is something you could think that could work for your lifestyle. So it's a very lifestyle business. I always say the way I've run my property business has been very much around my lifestyle. So there's some years I will invest, there's some years I won't invest. If I'm having babies, then I'm not going to be doing the hustle of going to view properties and all of that. So it's really about you deciding how you want to take your investment journey going forward. If you want to go into business, or if you want to just go straight into investing, we're going to cover all the different strategies. So I'm going to share my screen now, just so I can talk to some of these strategies. Okay, let's see. And I call this webinar, How You Can Get Started in the Next 3 Months in Property. And these are strategies for generating income from property. So the first question I'm going to ask before we go in, just so I have an idea of who's on the webinar and what sort of goals you have, because I will know just based on the question. So the question I have here is, are you already in property? So the response is 1, yes, I have a portfolio. 2, I own my own home. So you just have the one home. Or 3, I'm totally new to the game. So it's 1, I have a portfolio, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 properties, but they're buy to let. 2, I own my own home. Or 3, I'm new to the game. So if you could choose one of them, and then, yeah, so I can see from the polls that this is amazing. So quite a number of people are new to property, but okay, so I'd say 50% of the people on this webinar are new to property. And then the others, it's almost an equal split where we have, yes, you know, I have a portfolio, and then two have, so we're looking at 40, oh, the numbers are changing, sorry. So this is a poll where it's dynamic polling. So it's changing as I'm looking at it. So, okay, so at some point, I guess you're gonna have to end the poll so we can then share the stats. Okay. So yeah, it seems like it's still around the late 40s for totally new. We have some people who are you already in property? No. Okay. Okay, fine. So great. So I think we're finalized now. And yeah, so we have yes, 28%. We have no. I'm guessing no means not at all, because this is not quite tallying with the poll. But that being said, I kind of get the information that most of the people seem to be here, seem to be quite new to property. So, which is good, because I've prepared in a way to address that. So the I need to get this off, sorry. Okay. Sorry, just 1 second. I need to see my screen, and the poll is in the way. All right, so everyone on this webinar is capable of achieving a solid and sustainable property business and starting with strategy. So it's, like I said, it's really tailored around your lifestyle, and it's also tailored around what you want to achieve in terms of your goals. So the core thing is that you take action, that you're consistent, and consistency is vital, because I've mentored a few people, and I now see that with mentoring, you notice that the people that put in the action and they put in the consistency are the ones that get the result. And you have to be tenacious in this business, because there's so many no's you'll be getting along the way. And it's about you just overcoming and moving forward. So it's understanding that you can earn income from this business, and it's a good business to get into. But first, you need to consider a few things. Your current situation in terms of your credit. So understanding where you are financially, your financial exposure, your debt, your expenses, your income, how you're managing that. You need to be very on top of that. And that is more towards if you wanted to go into investing. If you wanted to set up a business, on the other hand, less important. So it's important when you're setting up a business that you're thinking of the fundamentals around that business and how you're going to launch it, and how, and really the reason why you're going down the business route as opposed to the investment route is because you don't have the initial capital to go straight into investing. Otherwise, if you had the initial capital, I would say go straight into investing. So what is your current situation? And then how much do you need to get started? How much will you need to accumulate, and what steps do you need to do to get that amount so you can then start? And if you're either going to get it from saving or from generating income through a business. Those are the two ways primarily. And then what location will I master? So I've selected London as my location. Regardless of strategy, I will invest in London. But then you have to assess. London might be overpriced. And sometimes a lot of investors say, London, not the greatest return on investment, but I'll show you some strategies that help me to be able to achieve what I need to achieve within this environment. And then what is my plan B? Because there always has to be a plan B. With property investing, no matter what aspect of it, there has to be a plan B, whether you have a business, whether you're investing. More so when you're investing, plan B for your funding sources, plan B for your investment options, whether you're going to sell, if you're going to remortgage, you always have to have multiple exit strategies. So that's just the first consideration before you then get into property. Now, to give some context, because why am I speaking to you? We've talked about the fact that I went full-time into property investing and started the property business 10 years ago. But I actually started investing part-time while I was working. And I always say that if you are going to look to property as your sort of retirement, in a sense, retirement, you want to retire into property or you want to quit your full-time job, then you need to demonstrate to yourself that you can generate income from whatever business you're running before you then quit your day job, just to make sure that you are covering your expenses and your income. So I got into, and this picture is basically showing the early days of this journey. And at that point, I'm still mainly focused on auction, purchasing, buying, flipping. So my strategy initially going, like I said, was more about flipping. My idea was buy, refurbish, sell. But very quickly I realized, especially when I went full-time into that business, that that was not sufficient in of itself. I needed to have other strategies that will also supplement that. Because as you can imagine, it had a very, I always say, like a yo-yo lifestyle, where you start off with a lot of funds. You've just come out of a project, you've just sold a property, good funds, and then you go into another project, and then it's kind of constrained. It's even more so constrained if you're in a down market like we're in now, where sometimes you're not able to get the amounts that you wanted to achieve in terms of the sale valuation. So, you know, it just had that ongoing lifestyle that I just thought, obviously, there has to be a better way. And a lot of the strategies then came out of having to come up with different ways to have supplemental income. So 12 solid years, flipping, joint venture deals, refurbishment, and real estate developments. And then rent to rent, which I'm going to talk about. And then, of course, I mentioned that I'm a wife and mom to 2 kids, both of them just going to be 5 and 3, so pretty young, but managing all of that. And I've put in here my Instagram handles just for the businesses that I run. So just a little bit more before we go into real core property talk. I'm a host of the Property Mom podcast, which is more about just talking about property and the experiences that I've had. And I share quite a lot on there. And then the membership, which is Property Kept Simple, which is recently set up, just part of the educating side of the business. And then Citygate, which is the core business, which is the property development and the management side of the business. So some of the projects that we've done, you know, refurbs, lofts, extensions, stunning kitchens, bathrooms, the whole works. And then the sort of largest project that I've done so far is the church that I bought very far up north. And that project pretty much just sold, and you know, that's a different story for a different day. But yeah, so some of the different projects that I've run over the years. So now just because we have a mixed multitude, so in a sense, people that have varying understanding of property and the way property generates income, I wanted to talk to this slide just to give a context around it. So capital appreciation, that's the way that most of us understand that property works. You buy a property, you hold it for a certain amount of time, and then the value goes up. But there are more savvy ways of property investing where you can force the appreciation from the onset. So you buy the property, you reconfigure that property either by adding some extension or doing whatever it is you want to do to the property. And then instead of waiting for time to dictate the value, it's you that's actually actively forced up the appreciation of that property. And I'll show you some examples of how that works in real life. And it's an amazing strategy for building your portfolio. Then cash flow income, as we understand it, rent, and the typical sort of monthly income you'd be getting from single lets if you had it just rented to a family, or if you were renting to HMOs, or which is house of multiple occupancy, where you have multiple people living in a property, each on an individual, they're renting the rooms on an individual basis as opposed to the whole property. And then you have service accommodation, which is and was and is my favorite strategy. Now the lockdown has impacted that strategy greatly, but when it's fully operational, it's an amazing strategy, and it's one I'm going to talk about today as well. And then real estate services. So when we're talking about generating income, we're talking about all the different types of businesses that you can have within property that generate income. So you're talking about interior design, we're talking about services like having your management company and all these different businesses that go along with supporting the real estate industry. And then the final way we generate income from property is real estate related services. So we're talking about things like rent to rent, lease option. These are strategies around real estate that help you to generate income, but you're generating income based on other people's property. So, and we're going to go into that as well. So the fundamental principle about earning income from an asset, most of us understand it to be owning, but there are other ways to earn income from an asset. So where you're providing services to that property, that's one way, like I've mentioned. Or two, when you're controlling the property, and that's through rental or through joint venture, where you have control over the property and you're able to generate income from that property. So either you have a joint venture with the owner, you have control over either by renting that asset. And it's so important when you're thinking about setting up a business around property, especially where you don't have the income, to be thinking of people in your network or people in your second sphere of influence. And I say the second sphere of influence and the people that know the people that you know, so that you can approach people that have access, either they have the income or they have the property, and you can work out a way you can help. So it's not about you asking and groveling and saying, oh, can I? A lot of times people that have income have it sitting in the banks, and they are looking for someone who's proficient and has an idea of how they could generate income from that money, especially now that interest rates are at 0%. So we're looking at how can you create a business that helps other people maximize the income that they already have just lying there, but also benefits you. So that's the fundamental principle about when you take control of either somebody else's property, somebody else's cash, in a sense, to invest in property. And that's just on the control side. But on the services side, I say there are all these different strategies, of which I'll talk about a few of them, and then I'll tell you how you can find out about the rest. And so why is this webinar important? Because business is the only system that creates wealth. And I say it's either somebody else's business or it's your business, right? So property is not for everyone, for sure, because I know a lot of people that are like, wow, it's a lot of stress. But the people that property is for, they know themselves. And sometimes it's not that you get into property investing or you get into property as a business with that passion, but over time, when you realize how it can really generate the income and how it can open so many doors, you then start to really start to see the future in it. So it's a business you can start today. It's all about leveraging the contacts that you have. It's also low startup. So some of the strategies I'll talk about are low startup. They don't require that much getting into, and it can create multiple alternative sources of income. So straight into strategies. So the first one I'm going to talk about is digital strategies. And I have to mention digital strategies because of the times in which we live in, especially post-COVID, because it has now shown us how, a lot of us that were in property, we're not necessarily leveraging off of digital strategies. And it's something that I've come to sort of regret, but I'm happy about the journey that I've had, because there's so many things that I could have sort of leveraged in my business, but I didn't, because I just ignored the side of the business completely. Now, so digital strategy has become almost fundamental as a part of my business because of the way the world is going. So for you to, when you're thinking, and I say it's not for everyone, and one of the reasons why I like digital strategy, it requires no mortgage, requires no credit check, and it requires access to other people's properties. And what you're trying to do with digital strategies is to build up a brand. You've decided property is the way I want to go. So rather than do it quietly and work in private, then start to tell the story. And we talk about, using media to tell your story. Number one, you're telling the story. Number two, you're educating potential clients, potential prospects, people who will eventually invest with you. And an example of this is when I started out, as I said, just with the flipping idea. I didn't necessarily know about joint ventures or anything like that. But then on my way to going to see a property, I ran into someone, and I always say it was such a fortuitous event because I just happened to run in. I just came out of the station and ran into this guy who ended up being my first investor. And the reason why I invested in him is because through my network, he knew that I was in property, but didn't necessarily know that much. So this is kind of where I'm talking about with when you're telling your story and when you're letting people know what you're doing, you don't know who's listening. So he says, oh, so you're now really full-time in it. And I said, yes, I am. And he says, look, let me know if you find any deals. I'll be interested in investing. And that's how I got my first joint venture partner. And that was so many years ago. And since then, I've been able to build up on that. So it's for you to understand that especially when you're starting out and you want to go down this route, that you think of property investing with the idea that you want to be creating a story around it. And I can't talk to the slide too long because I've looked at the time and we are running out of time. But basically the way it works is, in addition to the story you're telling, where you're telling the story about your journey, you're also building affiliate links. Now, you're building affiliate links telling your story so that when people click on those links, you also get income. And as I say, sometimes you're earning up to 20 to 50%. So for example, Chris Luck's membership method is very much around creating a course around whatever subject matter. And he will give you 50% if you send him a referral. Likewise with Land Sourcing Academy, this is just a few examples. There's so many different apps, different digital tools that whether property people use or non-property investors use. All of these are just generating income. And that is something that is just for you to keep at the back of your mind when you're going about sort of creating your business, that you're thinking of ways to leverage and earn income. And then the core strategies around, like I was saying, agent versus service strategies, again, require no mortgage, no credit check, and access to other people's property. We're looking at anywhere between 1,000 to 3,000 starting out, and it covers things like property management, relocation agent, buying agent, interior, refurbs, those types of businesses. And I go into that in a lot more detail if you wanted to find out more. And I'll give you an example of strategy number 2, which is where you earn income as a service accommodation search agent. And why I like this strategy is because when we come later, we're going to talk about rent to rent, but service accommodation normally works in that you transform a property into like a boutique hotel or something like that. But then now you're a search agent. You don't need to take on the ownership of the property. You don't need to take on renting that property as like you would in a rent to rent arrangement. All you do is you sit in the middle and you match people who want that property with people who own that property, and you earn a commission. So you are sitting in the middle as an agent. You create a face to the market. You make sure that you know that you're selling the right service and the right properties that would be attractive to a certain type of clientele, and that's all about area research as well. And then you match those people to people who already exist, who already have service accommodation properties existing. So you're not trying to go and look and create your own properties or buy anything. You're just matching. Now, one of the reasons why this strategy works is because, and a good example is service accommodation agent. This is a property that a colleague of mine manages in Collingdale. And I use Collingdale because a lot of the other examples I have will be maybe more central, but to let you know that this strategy works all over London and other parts of the country, and actually internationally as well. And what happens is with this strategy, you're sitting behind your desk. This is a property that normally would be a 500,000, but you have access to the property. You don't have to pay deposit. You don't have to pay stamp duty. You don't have to pay anything. All you do is negotiate with the landlord at a certain amount per night. Then you go to the market and put that property on the market. And you put that property at anywhere. And I'm telling you, in the summer, you can really just charge because there's so much demand, especially in the summer. And around those periods, you're talking about no credit check, no setup costs, other than say setting up the website and that presence to the market. But then on average, you're able to earn about 50 to 350 pounds per week, to about 300 pounds per week per booking. But get this, it's not just that you have the one property. Now think about how you can scale that up if you had 50 properties on your books, where you just had different bookings. And some people, that's their strategy completely. So I've always used this strategy as a side strategy, where alongside my rent to rent and my normal property business, I also have this, because I remember the first time I found out about this strategy was an agent that I met, and he said, just from this strategy alone, in the month of July, in the year he was talking about, he had made over £100,000 just from just matching people to different flats. These were not properties that he owned at all. And I've seen that in my business where you just, you're not even looking for it. Sometimes it just shows up. Somebody needs a property, you call somebody up and you can just match those properties. So very, very sort of light touch way of getting into property and earning income. And it's not that hard to get into, just need to understand the dynamics, the fundamentals, where to source properties and where to source clients. And that's a good business to get into. I'm going to cover one more strategy and then we'll go into questions. And this is a great strategy. So this is becoming a buying agent for overseas and busy buyers. And the previous strategy, one of the things that I always say is people know people that are coming into this country and they just refer them on and they're like, oh, you can take this property, or I know this guy that has a property. Actually, you're dropping money on the table on a daily basis in that case. It's like you need to be thinking and switching your brain on that this is literally income that you could easily be earning. And it's not even if you didn't even set up a business, just find people that you are matching and just earning the income off of it. And I know some people that do that. Not even some people that don't live in this country, they will send me referrals and they'll be like, don't forget my cut. And that, so it's just to let you know that there's all these sort of side hustles that you can extract from property. Now, becoming a buying agent, the reason why I went through all that story is to say that some of you also know people that are overseas investors, potential overseas investors that you could be messaging, and you could be talking about the fact that this is not a bad time to be looking at securing overseas investment, i.e. investment in the UK. So if you understood how property investment works in the UK, then this is a service that you could easily pitch to people who are looking to purchase here. And the amazing thing is, not only do you as a buying agent, typically all of us that live here are aware of agents who work on behalf of the sellers, but a buying agent, you're acting on behalf of the buyers. So that's why they tend to be overseas investors or busy buyers, because if they were local, then they would just go to the estate agent themselves and then they wouldn't need to pay the 2% fee. But if you're sourcing for somebody who's overseas, then you can earn a commission, and sometimes it's up to 2%. And guess what? If you're buying directly from a developer, you can also get income from the developer. So that sometimes you're looking at 5% overall. And because we're looking at large sums of monies, especially if you're buying in London, then you can very quickly see how with the service accommodation model, that's a low hanging fruit. £50 here, £300 there, £400 there. It does rack up though. With this one, you only need like 2 deals in a year and you're already maybe close to 6 figures. So you see how you can start to generate income using all these different strategies. So now we've gotten to the break. And if you have any questions just relating to the first session that I've talked about, you have maybe 2 questions, space for 2 questions before I then dive into the next set of strategies. Okay. Okay, I can't see the questions properly.
Maybe, Osa, can you read the questions out? Because it's a bit fuzzy on the screen, please.
Sure, I can do that. So the hottest question we have here, can you all hear me? Dolapo, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Yes, the hottest question we have here is this. Will we receive these slides?
Yes, you will.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The next question, the next hottest one is, what strategy involves the least investment effort in terms of time and cost, but maximum results? That's an excellent question.
That's a great question. And I think, so I always say the thing with it is, you're right, there is a lot of businesses do have that. You need to put in a lot of time, a lot of effort into them to be able to generate the income. And I have to say from all of the two, and we're going to talk about joint ventures. So joint ventures, if you're not doing the work, as in you're just going to do a lot of, there's no business that's not going to require at least some work, right? So joint ventures, I would say, is about the least touch, because you can create a platform where, and we'll talk about joint ventures later on, where you have everything outsourced, but then you're doing most of just the financial aspect of it. You're doing the number crunching and you're doing that, and you're trying to get investors. So I would say joint ventures. The other one I would say is the buyer's agent that I just talked about. Now, buyer's agent, it may, as much as it may require some time, it's not time where you're going about. It's time where you're actually searching for a property or searching for a deal, as opposed to, and then you're also searching for investors. So, you know, it's going to be difficult to say that there's a business that you can get into that minimizes the amount of time and cost, but those I would say are about the two easiest. And then, like I said, low hanging fruit, service accommodation, once you have the channel set up, then it's really just about making the calls and connecting people who are coming to the country with people who have the properties already, and just making the income, and you don't have to leave your desk. That just works for itself. So that is.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question is this: Dolapo, is it possible to get a one-to-one with you?
Yes, indeed. I'm going to give my information at the end of this session, so that if you want to have a one-to-one and you want to discuss your goals and your investment plans, then we can have that conversation.
Thanks very much. The next question is, why would landlords want to use an agent when they can just put stuff on Airbnb? Is there a compelling advantage?
Let me tell you why. Because you get tired very quickly. So I think when you start out in these businesses, you're so excited, the income. Now I've been in Airbnb now, because that's the service accommodation side of the business, right? I've been in it now this is going to be my 8th year. I sort of stumbled on it. And I would say that by last year, I was already getting completely exhausted. Not because I don't have stuff, but because there's always so many things going on and so much activity. So whilst it's very high income generating, it can wear on you after a while. The same with HMO, which I'm not covering today, but I cover in a webinar that I'm going to talk about later on. And HMOs, all these different strategies, even having a normal let. I think having a normal standard let is about the easiest strategy that is the most hands-off you're going to get. But even that has a bit of its own challenges, which can be managed. But I think with most landlords, they do get weary over time, especially as they start getting old. And that's why there's now this concept called the tired landlord, where they have these assets and they just don't want to deal with the running of them, and they will happily pay you 10, 15, 20% to deal with the headaches. And, you know, if you have good systems, then you can minimize the headaches. But, you know, different people have different proficiencies. Some people are admin type people. Some people just want to go out and get the deals. Some people don't want to be bogged down with running the property. So, you know, there's always, and this is why I say with this business, there's always clients that especially if you are in a city that is, you know, that has a lot of investments and a lot of investors operating in that area.
Thank you. The next question is, how can one register on the London Short Stays platform? Is it free to register?
Yes, it is. Now, I have to say, with London Short Stays, we're rebranding. And that's because I realized over this past COVID that this whole lockdown season, because obviously, as I said, it was greatly impacted that business, that having a more national business or even potentially global business makes more sense in terms of generating income. Because then that way, London Short Stays, while it's a great name, it also limits me to only being able to invest in London. But meanwhile, lots of people are global travelers, right? So I then, I had met somebody who had a company that had a more sort of generic name, so that he then has different countries on there. He has Paris, he has, you know, different countries that, France, different countries in Europe that can then build up his platform. So that's the direction in which I'm going. So if it's something you're interested in, if you send me an email and just put service accommodation portal in the title, then I can let you know and keep you on the waiting list once it's up and running. But it's definitely, we're working on it right now.
Thanks very much. We have 5 more minutes for questions. The next question is, if you already have a property in a choice city like London, can you sell and then purchase smaller sized properties in other non-expensive areas like Coventry?
Yeah. Okay. So for me, I have this aversion to selling, and I know I can't advise you because everybody's situation is different. But if there was a way to extract value from your property, and we'll talk about this strategy as well, where you extract as much equity from the property, then I would rather you did that and use that equity to buy another property. Because the thing with London is, you know, London is one of the cities that actually holds its value the most, and is why I've chosen London to invest in. Now, there are other cities that have actually outperformed London, say like Birmingham, over the past few years because of the investment amounts that you get into those areas. They're much less than if you're investing in London. But for me, if you have a property in the price, you know, it doesn't even matter where in London, but you already have a choice city property, as you've mentioned. So selling, for me, I would say try and extract as much as you can from that property and then move into a less expensive area. Now, if you can't extract and you feel like that property is weighing your investment model down, then you can sell and then take those funds and then go and invest somewhere else. But, you know, it is very much a personal choice type of response.
Thank you. Next question. Invest in flats or invest in terraced, detached or semi-detached? What would be your advice?
I love this question because for me, the strategies that I'm going to talk to you in about investing really focus on flats, because there are ways that you can just generate and just continue to just, especially when you're in the city. But if you're going to go outside London, then definitely houses. You need to be looking at terrace houses, detached houses, and semi-detached houses. And also it's down to strategy as well. If you're going to go down HMO strategies, then probably you want to go more with the semi-detached or detached or even terraced. If you're going to go service accommodation, or you're going to go with single lets in which you buy a property, do it up, refurbish, move on, then flats do very well as well. So it really is about your price point, because of course flats are also cheaper than most flats, if they're not new builds, are cheaper than terraced houses or detached houses. So it's about how much you have to invest and your strategy that you're going to apply to that property at the end of your investment.
Thank you. 2 more minutes for this question and answer session. What advice would you give to someone wanting to expand in property, flipping more than one property a year, but only has cash for one property?
I would say call me and sign up with me, because I'll tell you how with that one property, you can really just keep rolling on that investment. And that's how to grow your portfolio. So you can try flipping. This market, you know, there are debates as to whether flipping is a good strategy in this market, because I personally feel like we're in a downturn, even though right now seems to be a great time to be selling because there's a lot of buzz in the market, pent-up demand from the lockdown has created. But I feel like once the fallout of all of the lockdown starts to come through, that we might, you know, I'm not sure what the market is going to be. So I'm just watching. So if you wanted to go into cash, into a purchase, I would say there are strategies that you have where you can buy the one property and then maximize. Remember when I was talking about forcing the appreciation from the onset so that you can extract as much, and you'll see some of the examples when we go into the next session. So definitely stick around.
Okay, we have just about a minute left for the question and answer session. Where do you start with an investment of £10,000?
I would say 100% rent to rent. If you are, so at some point in my journey, I almost thought, why spend £100,000 buying a property when I can get 10 rent to rents and be maximizing? Because honestly, the return on rent to rent, either HMOs and more so service accommodation, is quite astounding. I was doing the math and I was like, I'm not sure that there's another business other than maybe buying and selling goods where you can match the amounts that you earn from rent to rent, especially if you find a very good cash flowing property. So for me, you have 10,000. You have the option to also do crowdfunding, which is getting more popularity now. So it has less touch, but you get your returns. But in terms of real maximum investment, real maximum returns on your investment, then it has to be rent to rent. Find a good property and then create that sort of model that will work for you being able to rent it from the landlord and then being able to rent it out either as a HMO to individual lets or as a service accommodation to a whole to people who are traveling for whatever reason to that city.
Thanks very much. Right on time. We have quite a number of questions left, but not to worry. We will carry them over into the next question and answer session. Please continue, Dolapo.
Okay, great. So I'm going to go now into the next set of strategies, which is more now, we're going to cover rental strategies first. And yes, I put on the slide. So like I said, if you want to know more information, always check me out at propertymom.co.uk, and I'm on Instagram as well under propertymomuk. So rental strategies, again, require no mortgage. I like rental strategies in that with a lot of other businesses and a lot of other strategies, there's a bit of, especially with property management, to get the keys from the landlord requires a bit of nurturing and developing that relationship. Or sometimes you can be lucky and get a landlord to hand over their properties quite quickly, depending on where you meet them. But with rent-to-rent strategies, you're renting the property. So you find the right property, you find the right landlord, and you just rent the property. It's completely a transactional relationship. There's no personal interest, there's nothing. So you rent the property at a certain amount, and then you can then turn around and rent that property, like I said to the individual that asked the question, that you can then turn it around and rent it to other people. And you have this service accommodation model, or you have the HMO, or just a simple single let where you've negotiated, especially in these times, you've negotiated a reduced rent from the owner, and then you can rent it out at the normal price if you want to take that risk. And so limited credit checks, like I said, is definitely never going to be as rigorous as if you wanted to buy your own property. Also very limited in terms of funds. So you don't need 100,000 or 50,000 to start. With 10,000 or less, I think anywhere between 5,000 and 10,000, you can get yourself a rent-to-rent. And you're leveraging off of other people's properties and earning the income. And please, I've heard some people say something that I think is so ridiculous, which is, I'm sorry, I don't like rent-to-rent strategies. I'm going to go Nigerian because I'm paying somebody else's mortgage. And that makes no sense, because ultimately it's like you're buying and selling, right? So yes, you're paying somebody else's mortgage, but the amount of returns you're making on your own investment is worth it. So I buy property to invest, but guess what? I also rent properties as my side strategy to generate income, because investment properties, usually we're looking at return on investment, maybe 2% in London. And then if you look at your cash element, okay, maybe 15% if you get a good deal. But we're talking with rental strategies, we're looking at, I'll talk to you about the numbers now. So I say, if you're going to do a rent-to-rent, and definitely on a service accommodation rent-to-rent, then you should be earning minimum of £1,000 a month on that property. Now that's me. £500 a month is also fine, but we're looking at how many properties do you need to get into your portfolio before you can then say, I'm either matching my salary or I'm meeting my goals. So it's really the difference between the rent you pay and what you charge your clients. And that's why I say you want to be trying to earn excess of £1,000 per property. And this in essence requires that you take control of a property and then you sublet it for a profit. So, and subletting is not illegal. It just needs to be you just need to have landlord's consent to do it. And some people have sort of gone the back way and been, a bit backhanded in taking properties and then not letting the landlord know. But really, ideally, what you want to do is to let the landlords or the agent know the purpose for which you will be taking the property, especially if it's going to be a high turnover type of strategy that you want to employ. So, level of proficiency, I'm sorry I couldn't go through the other slides, but I'll talk to the slide. Level of proficiency with rent-to-rent is medium, in that you should understand property techniques and property, the fundamentals of property, but you don't need to have such a deep understanding as you would say if you're doing a joint venture. And then budget to start is medium to high, because now we're no longer in the sub 3,000, sub 5,000. Now we're in the 5,000 to 10,000 pounds bracket of investment. And then the barrier to entry is pretty low. So which means in essence that there's also competition in the market. So it's something to be aware of. And then technical ability is medium, because you will need to understand how to generate income, because the worst thing to do is to take a rent that ends up costing you, because you have that monthly rent that you have to pay. And you need to understand how to fill the properties so that you're maximizing on your income. So definitely the skills you need: research, a lot of research, networking, and negotiation. And then you need to be organized and understand financial concepts, and to some degree, people skills. So to give a good example, and this property is the reason how I discovered rent to rent. So I always say that when I went, there was once I went for, I always go for property events from time to time. And there was one I went for where the guy was saying, oh, there's this hot new strategy, this strategy. And honestly, I understand why people rave about rent to rent. So he was going on about this strategy. This is about 5 years ago. And I was like, what is this rent to rent strategy? What is this amazing strategy? Then when he started to describe it, I was like, oh, wow. So I stumbled on something that I could have become a millionaire off of just talking about, because pretty much if you are in investing and you're renting a property on a normal long-let basis, and then it was a colleague of mine that had actually opened my eyes to know about serviced accommodation. So when I got into property, as I said, I got into property for flipping. One of the things I identified very quickly was I couldn't get tenants who were long-term tenants into the property. So I needed short-term tenants. So between the colleague and Gumtree at the time, I used to just get all these bookings, and it was short-term, 3-week, 2-week. And at the time, I didn't even know that you could earn that much. I just thought it was more about just trying to cover my mortgage, so I didn't have to pay all of the mortgage payments at the end of the deal, because it was flipping. And my first deal, I'd paid the mortgage throughout, and it ended up taking 5 months to sell. So with this strategy, I started to realize that actually I can increase the prices. And at some point, when I came across this property, when they told me how much the property was, it was £2,500 per month to rent. But then I knew at this point that 3 beds in central London, or zone 2, were already at about 250, 300 per night. So it wasn't rocket science. I turned to the agent and I said, look, can I manage this property as a short let for you? And they said, no, we want something long-term. I said, don't worry, I'll find a long-term tenant. And I then set up my business as the long-term tenant, renting the property. And I told them, I said, I'm going to have corporate tenants coming through this property. It's going to be a corporate let. And they were like, fine, that's fine. And this property, as you can see, the next door property sold for just over £1 million last year. But I was controlling this property, and this is what I talk about, controlling strategies like rental, for £10,000. When you look at the breakdown, the deposit was 3,000, the rental 2,500, like I said, staging anywhere from 2 to 5, but I think it cost me less than 2 because the property was already fully furnished. And then maintenance as well, which is the ongoing monthly maintenance of the property. And it consistently throughout the time up until the lockdown, pretty much consistently brought in very, very strong income. So that, when you think about rent to rent as a strategy, it's not surprising that it was, because it's such a popular strategy. And I remember coming into 2020 thinking that, wow, this strategy is so strong. I wonder when legislation is going to come in to really cripple the business. But I didn't know that we had some other things in store for us. So this business, fantastic business, and like I said, 300 per night on average in the summer, drops to about 200 per night in the winter, but consistently, because it was very, nicely done up, always in demand. And so when you compare it to other 3 beds in the area, or even hotels in the area where nowhere as big, the comparison made it so easy for it to achieve the numbers that it did. So, and that's just one example that I can give. And there's lease options as well, which I talk about under both strategies, actually works for for rental strategies, but also works for investment strategies. Now, investment strategies are for people who have funds. Now, funds sitting in the bank or funds as equity in an existing property. So if it's your main home, you have to make that judgment whether you want to release equity from your main home to invest, because obviously you're increasing your own liability and exposure. But if it's well done, then that investment that you take out can easily pay for itself from the investments that you plug it into. But it's very much a personal choice, because some people, their own aim is to pay down their mortgage till they, they have a goal of paying down their mortgage so that they retire with no mortgage on their properties. Some other people, especially if you're younger, I think you can take a bit of a risk around that and invest with building up your portfolio with that amount that you've built up as equity in the property. So that's very much a non-professional, you do understand, that's very much a personal choice. So when you're making these decisions, it's very good for you to get a broker or somebody who's in financial services to advise you on your own personal circumstance. And then one thing that I didn't mention when I was talking about starting out is understanding the value of building your credit. So I did talk about not having good credit, but it's very important that when you're going into investment strategies, that a portion of it will require that you have very strong credit. And even for those of us that guard our credit with our lives, there's still a lot of scrutiny that goes into investment. And I say that the banks are pretty much the gatekeepers of the property industry, because the banks are really sitting there and they're stopping whoever doesn't meet their criteria based on the fact that they learned their lessons very hard in the last financial crisis in 2008. So when you're looking at investment and you want to go in this direction, you need to be checking your credit report and making sure that you're building up good credit. And that does not mean don't get a credit card. It means you have to get a credit card and you have to maintain your credit card and show and demonstrate that you can manage credit. It's very, very important to understand that. So some of the strategies here, crowdfunding, becoming very popular. Joint ventures, an amazing way to build up your portfolio if you don't have that initial deposit. And then lease options, another good way, very incidental. And I always make that disclaimer that I've never been successful at getting a lease option through, because there's so many different criteria that need to match for a lease option to be successful. Now, I only discovered lease options about 2 or 3 years ago. It's possible that if I'd known about it earlier on, I could have struck some deals with people that had properties, because with lease options, you're looking for people that have distressed properties or have distressed situations. They need to get rid of their property and you're stepping in with a strategy to help. So, so there are all these different strategies. I can talk about a few of them. However, my non-professional advice based on my experience in the market is that with property strategies, especially now we're entering this post-pandemic season, is that we are very cautious. So I'm applying a very cautious approach. And that means that I'm constantly looking to add value. I'm not just going to buy a property and leave it and wait for time to dictate the value. I'm trying to make sure that I add value from the onset so that even if the prices go down, I have already done the additional add value so that then it's at least matching and I don't ever fall into negative equity on my mortgage. And negative equity is where you've loaned a certain amount because of the value of the property, but then because property prices are dipping, then the amount you've loaned is now overshadowing the value of the property, meaning you can't sell that property. So understanding that you always want to be adding value, you want to hold on to longer term deals, you want to evaluate your deals to make sure that they have long-term ability so that you can hold on to those deals through a bad time. So if we do get into a season where, people are losing their jobs and things are happening, that you have a plan, which I always say, your plan B, your plan C, to get you weather through this season. And then keep cash reserves. So this is not the time to be extending yourself and really pulling out and taking out too much leverage. I think that's my personal thought about this season, is that whilst there will be deals and there will be opportunities, to be cautious because we don't know what's coming. This is not a season that anybody can really say, oh, we had 2008, because I got into the market in 2008. So I have an idea of how you would ride tough season. But I can't even, based on that experience, say what's going to happen because it's such completely different fundamentals. So, so it's understanding that you need cash to keep as a buffer. So have your investment funds, but also have cash, especially for rental voids. So I'll tell you that I have some properties that have been empty for the past 3 months because the season has completely changed. People are not moving as much, and only now am I getting viewings. So being sure that you have rental income that's kept aside to tide over the season is very important. And then I always say, when you're going into property investing, be very, very careful with lenders. So always have multiple exit strategies, and also with lenders. So never rely on one lender. And I'll tell you, if I have time, just as we came into COVID, I had a property that I needed to remortgage out of. And I had one lender, I had been on that property. I'd been going through the process. I told you, even with good credit, they're scrutinizing everything about the property and about you as a person. Having gone through 3 months of scrutiny, intense scrutiny with this lender, COVID hit, the lockdown hit, and they pulled out. They said, I'm sorry, we're not in a capacity to be able to lend anymore. Now that would have really cost me a lot of money if I didn't apply my policy to have 2 backup. So I had my follow-up lender that I was able to quickly switch to, because I'd already started that process with that lender, so that when this one fell off, yes, it wasn't as great a deal, but it meant that I wasn't holding on to a property with very, very stringent bridging. So for those of you that understand the way property works, is sometimes when you want to buy a property, you buy it under bridging, which is a very expensive loan. It's almost like a loan shark type of loan with the monthly income. But because it makes a lot of sense when you're holding it for just a short period of time, a lot of us that go into property investing use it to get us into the longer term funding, because within that time, then you can do all the additions you want to do to the property and then put it back on the market to remortgage it and then come off of it. So understanding that when you're going to property investing, that you need to be constantly evaluating your exit scenario and the deals that you're doing, and always be planning for downside risk. So the 2 property strategies I can quickly talk about are the buy, refurbish, refinance. And that's what I meant when I was talking to the fellow who asked the question about, I have a certain amount that can only buy the 1 property. Buy, refurbish, rent, and remortgage, the BRR strategy, is the fundamental strategy in property investing. If you don't know about it, call me, because this strategy makes it possible that with that same amount, if you find the right property, which now I know, when I started, I think about my first deal, I didn't know about the strategy. So I bought the property and refurbished property and waited for time, and I made some money. But when I look back, I definitely dropped 30K easy on that project because I didn't know about this strategy. Because this strategy works in that it helps you to add value so that you've forced the value of the property from the onset, and you can then remortgage and move on to the next. So definitely a good strategy for building your portfolio. Sorry. Hence the name Property Mom. So anyway, and then auction purchasing as the strategy. As you saw in my previous picture, I love auctions because I know people have other ways of sourcing property, and I do know about sending out letters, and all those types of strategies are good and they're strong. But if you know what you're doing, auction purchasing, not during the lockdown, by the way, I have to give that disclaimer. Auction purchasing was a disaster during the lockdown for those that were buying. For those that were selling, they were doing amazing because they were the only game in town. They were the only people selling. They were the only ones that had optimized their processes to be able to quickly respond to the COVID crisis. All the other agents kind of fell off the block. So because of that, auction purchasing then became this sort of like, a lot of people that had funds just kind of gravitated towards it. But a normal day, auction purchasing, you know how to pick the property, you go view the properties, you see the right property, you can very quickly build a business off of it. And to quickly run through examples, so now we have this property. You always select the area because the area needs to work. It's not every area, but most areas in London, I would say, work with this strategy. But there are other fundamentals you need to do when you're doing area analysis, so you pick a property in the right area. And this property, the minute I saw it, I knew, I always get this buzz that, oh wow, this is going to be a good one. And nice single entrance property straight into its own section, but at 400,000 in the auction. Very much I had planned to go to the auction, but I wasn't necessarily planning to buy anything at the auction. But then when I saw the price, I knew it was a must buy, because I knew that properties in that area done up were 550. I knew that. I'd done the research. But it didn't even cost that much to refurbish. Basically just reconfigure the internal, and then within 5 months was able to extract the full value at the 550, and it was valued at 550 by 2 lenders, so that I had that immediate uplift on this property. And if we look at the cash investment, usually quite a high cash investment, but I told you it's a 400K property. There are properties that still work in this model where you'd be looking more maybe 300, 250, depending on the part of London that you're willing to invest in. So I tend to invest because I want to be close to home, closer to sort of the northwest, that sort of direction. But if you were going to a southeast or further towards the east, then you get so many other deals that could work and stack up with the numbers we're talking about. So very simple deal to do investment wise, remortgage 75% loan to value, released money to reinvest. So I've released, I put in, so there is money left in this deal, which is 40,000 or thereabouts, but then I have enough to move into another deal. It may not be in the same area, but I can buy in another area that's maybe less priced, and then still kind of recycle that fund. And that's what I was saying in the opening the opening video, to say that these are the type of strategies that you can employ in property investing that help you to build up a portfolio pretty quickly. And if you hear people saying that they built up their portfolio and, like in the last 5 years, they've gone from this to this, is usually because they've perfected an area and they perfected purchasing in that area, transforming the property, putting it back on the market, and being able to extract how much they've invested so they can roll on. So an example of an auction purchase, as I said, this was a 1-bed with already it had planning. So some of the deals that I look at are deals that already have planning, so that I don't have to go through the time that it takes to get planning. Although now with Boris Johnson's build philosophy, then getting planning for a lot of all these type of commercial to residential conversions will become an easier thing to achieve in this dispensation. Not as simple as the other project, but less price in terms of it only costs 300,000 to buy it. Refurb costs a bit more, but at the end of the day, it was revalued so that I could extract 195, at least the value that was added to it was 195K to the property. And then when I remortgaged, I could almost extract everything that I put in, because I put in 170K. And I was able to extract just leaving about 10,000. But the rental, if you look at the rental compared it to what is left in the deal, it makes this deal work. And this is why I can invest in London, because if you find a patch that works, then you don't have to necessarily go out to Birmingham or go out to somewhere else. You can just make it work within the area that you are investing in. So, and pretty much it's about the property kept simple method, and this is why I set up the membership as well, so that really I'm simplifying the way property works, not because it doesn't have its complexities. Of course, everything does, but there's a way you can run it where it's not so onerous. It's not, depending on you, some people have the goals to have this huge property portfolio and they want to have these complex deals, and that's fine. But for me, I keep it simple. I just want the income that works and the projects that work. And that's how I run my business. And it's pretty much, that's why I call it a simple method. And it's about sourcing, increasing the value, modifying, presenting the property to the right tenant, letting it to the right tenant as well, and then extracting value at the end, like you saw in the case studies that I gave. So, success tips. And this is really about the wealth principle. Like I said, I didn't get the education, so I put money on the table when it came to some of my investment choices. But really, it's about you getting that education. And if you are one that feels like, you know what, property is definitely the way for me. I want to get that solid foundation, then get the education, and then get confident in applying the concepts that you've learned. It's not about just sitting down, doing a course and then parking it. It's about getting that ongoing, that confidence, and then just getting on with it. Find a project that works, go to the market. If you're going to be going more in the business direction, do business, source the clients, hammer on the doors, do what you need to do, get the business moving. Once you get that one deal through, then you're able to kind of, get more deals through, and you find the opportunities just start to open. Like I said, with me now, with the different opportunities that have opened up because I've gone into property, only God knows what I would have been doing in my day job. And I'm not knocking day jobs, I loved it when I had during that period, but for now, this is what, and so it's about you making that choice for yourself. If you're going to go into business, if you're going to put in the time to develop it, versus if you want to go into investing, then you can also do the same thing. Get the education, get confident, get on with it, get a project, and start earning income. So question number 2, after we've heard all of this, before you can actually go into deciding, before we go into any deeper questions, it's about where are you now? So the 3 choices, what describes your current situation? Number 1, do you need to clean up your credit? Because like I said, there are strategies that work for if you need to clean up your credit, and while you're cleaning up your credit, you can be earning income, building a portfolio. You need to grow your monthly, and by the way, you can only pick one. Grow your monthly income, so you know that your strategy now is all about maximizing the income generating side of your business, in a sense. And 3, are you trying to build up a portfolio? So you build up assets, you have enough of an income, or you want to do a joint venture because you know people that have access to funds that you can partner up with. Okay. So makes sense that a few people need to clean up their credit history, and indeed, it's very important that you always keep an eye on your credit history and you keep an eye on the payments and expenses and all that kind of stuff to build up your credit. But whilst you're doing that, you can get into property and get into different techniques or different strategies that you can build income from. And then if you need to grow your monthly income, of course, because you have to develop that monthly income before you can then start to buy and invest in the larger assets. But like I said, there are different strategies. You can do rental strategies if you have enough, or you can partner up. So joint ventures, if you're somebody that can really go out there and look for joint venture partners, is a great way to build your portfolio if you don't have that initial income. So let me see. So most of you are looking, about 71% are looking more towards growing their portfolio, whilst let's see. Okay, need to build a portfolio. Okay. All right, so understood and get that. So how can I help? I've gone through all of this, and we're going to have questions and answers at the end so that you can ask all the questions that you have. What I've put together is a webinar. So it's on the Friday, the 31st of July, and it's at 7 p.m. And we're going to do a deep dive into the strategies that you can start to develop. If you have 0, I usually say not 0, so that's a typo. It should be 1,000 at the very least, because you will need to set the business up. So you do need that initial investment. So I don't really believe in no money down deals. I think you need an investment to be able to set things up anyway. And then, so you can set up a business under that, or then 10,000 where you go into rental strategies, and then 100K, and that's just a figure. Obviously, anything from about 50 onwards, you can buy a property. And then, so how do you generate additional sources of income using simple strategies so that you're protected and that you have a secondary source of income, or that you're creating multiple sources of income? And then the best strategies that work for your current goals and, constraints, like we talked about time, income, financial standing, i.e. your credit. So wanting to know the best strategies, and then step-by-step plan of action to get you started in property. So all of this we're really talking about on Friday 31st. And It's going to be £25 just for the webinar. It's very much a low-priced setup, just so that I can sort of pour out and let you know all the different strategies if you are inclined to want to invest in property, either by setting up your business or going the investment route and partner up with people as well, that we really do a deep dive and assess which ones work for you and which ones you can invest in and which businesses you can start up. So we'll go over, I think of my last count, there are 14 of them that don't require much to start off with, and then a further 7 for investment if you wanted to go into investment. So I'm going to break them out into 2, and I'm having the investment meeting separate from the 14 strategies, so that it's clear when you come for them what you're actually signing up for. So this webinar is actually for the strategies if you don't have that much starting out. So we'll go do a deep dive into all of those strategies and how you can get into property investing. And then the second one I will announce. So if you just send me an email if you're interested at info@propertymom.co.uk, and they will send out all the information about this anyway, so you'll receive that too, hopefully over the next couple of days. So if you wanted to reach out to me for property investing, you can always reach me on info@propertymom.co.uk. But if you wanted to sign up for the 2-hour webinar, then if you go to go.propertymom.co.uk, you'll see the link to sign up. So now on to the questions. If you have any additional questions, and then I guess we can take the questions from the previous round as well.
Yes. Do you see the screen clearly?
No, it's a bit fuzzy.
Okay, I think we'll just use the same strategy.
Okay.
So right now, the 2 hottest questions that we have, the first of them is this: can you throw more light on rent-to-rent strategy?
Okay, so more light in that, I guess that's a very wide question. So rent-to-rent strategies, the simplest way to describe it is to say, you take a property, you source a landlord or an agent that has a property on the market, you rent that property from them under a normal rental basis, so as an AS2, as a company. Then you in turn turn that property into a business and then rent it out to other people. Now the 3 main strategies that you could then apply would be if you rented it to a service accommodation, which is kind of like a boutique hotel where you styled out the property and then rented it out, or number 2, where you divided up, like if you got a house, for instance, divided up into number of rooms, and then you can rent out those rooms on an individual basis and have the individual tenants paying you their rent. And then the last one is if you just get a single tenancy into the property. Now, the difference between the amount you're earning as the income coming from the tenants that you put in the property or the guests that you put in the property, minus the amount that you rented the property out originally from the landlord or the agent, that's where your income is. And that's how the rent-to-rent strategy really works, in that that's where you make your own money. So the higher you can rent it out for, the more you earn. And which is why I preferred the service accommodation strategy as well. Now HMOs to work because HMOs also give good income, but they're not, in my opinion, as high as you would get with service accommodation, but they're less risky as well. So.
Thank you. The next one, for rent to rent as a starter, how best do I advertise the rental so I can guarantee occupation? So
depending on which strategy, if you're going down the HMO route, then putting it on property on platforms. So I always talk about these portals that you can go directly to the market, of course, with Facebook ads, and that's sort of creating your own website to market directly to your end client, especially if you know who your end client is. And a good example is some people focus on the contractor market. So those are people that have, say, building sites, or they're working on a project and they need to stay in a property. So some people know how to message those type of people to stay in their properties. But I say that the easiest way to get bookings and to get rental to your property is usually by signing up to a portal. So if in HMOs, usually it would be spare rooms, And with service accommodation, things like Airbnb, Booking.com, those types of platforms can really help to bring in rental. But like I said, there are different strategies that you can use to get more bookings or more tenants into your property.
Thank you. Another hot question. With all the strategies mentioned, are there legalities involved? Do legal documents need to be signed, and for which strategies specifically?
That's a good question. So for of course, with all of the strategies, especially where you're controlling the assets of somebody else, then there are standard documentation. So as you can imagine, in a rent-to-rent arrangement, you'll have documents like contract agreements, management contract agreements that you signed with the landlord, or corporate contract agreements that you signed with the landlord to take, or the agent to take over the property. Then on the flip side, you'll also have the contracts that you need to give to your clients, which could, all these things are now done online anyway, but they could also be paper manual as well. So you'd have all of that paperwork to also deal with. Now in strategies like buying agent or deal sourcing, which I didn't cover on this, which I cover in the webinar, those strategies need, depending on how you run it, sometimes they will need compliance. So you getting registered to actually act as a deal sourcer. So different strategies do have varying level of legalities involved. All businesses have legal aspects, and that's where you have lawyers, or you pay the online legal brokers to make these documents for you. So, but there are so many resources around that as well.
Thank you. What percentage margins are reasonable for rent-to-rent, and what is the difference between rent-to-rent and HMO?
So rent-to-rent is, so they're two different things in a sense, but you combine them. And so like, I have a podcast coming out where I was talking about service accommodation, right? So service accommodation is a strategy all by itself, and it's an income maximizing strategy. So rather than rent out the property to someone as a normal let, you rent it out to a guest and you earn much more. Same thing with the HMO. Rather than rent it out to just one single family, you have a house that has 4 rooms, you rent it out to individual lets, and you can then earn more. So say that property maybe with 2,500. Now you're able to rent out that same property at each room at £1,000 per tenant at £4,000. So that is a strategy by itself. So if I own the property, I can apply that strategy. Now, you tie it with rent to rent, and that's because you don't own the property, but you're trying to earn income. And this rent to rent strategies have always existed, because I remember an Uber driver picked me up a few months ago, and he told me about what he was doing in 1980 something, and it was very much rent to rent, where you rent the property and then you rent it out again. So the reason why it's different from HMOs is only because you're renting the property from someone and then you're re-renting it out to somebody else. But that somebody else could be a HMO, could be a service accommodation, could be a normal standard tenant. So you see the difference is that one is more about the structure that you're using to take ownership of the property. The other one is more about the income generation, the strategy that you've used to generate income on that property. So if you're going to be renting out as a HMO, as a service accommodation, or as a single let. And that's really the difference between rent to rent and HMOs.
Thank you. An important question. Please, how can one get a mortgage with bad credit?
I'm so sorry to announce to you that if I knew the answer to that question, like I said, the banks are the gatekeepers of the property market. Like, they are the reason why we don't have as many people buying property, because they will stand at the gate and let people in as as they assess, as they deem you worthy. Because ultimately, the only way you can get a property with bad credit is by cash, or by joint venturing with somebody who has good credit and so if you have the cash, and this is also a strategy that I've used where I've met clients who have cash, but they don't have good credit. And so we come up with an arrangement or they have cash and they can't get access to a mortgage for whatever reason. So we come up with a joint venture. So I can say that the best way you can with bad credit is to find somebody who has good credit and then come up with a joint venture arrangement. And you can do that legally, where you may not be able to be put on the property deed at the beginning of the deal. So you really need to know who it is you're doing the business with, but you can park your money in that property and eventually get on the deed once all of the paperwork around the finance has been done. So you've gotten the refinance or you've gotten the mortgage, then you can put your name on. But you need to check with the broker because some lenders will have issues as well. But ultimately, that's the only way you can get on, is that you have to partner with somebody who has good credit, or you have to fix your credit.
Thank you very much. Well, right now, you guys are making us let a cat out of the bag. We weren't going to mention this yet, but we do have a next masterclass coming, and that's about finance management. So I think these questions on credit are right on topic. So watch out for that one. We will be having another masterclass in finance management. For now, we'll just keep on going with the questions. Next question: how do you scale up from rent to purchasing your first property? How long does it take?
It depends on how aggressive you are. So for me, rent ended up being an amazing way. I did some financials in a year, and the rent income from rent to rent is what I was able to then tie onto some of my mortgages to add to increase the amount of the property I could purchase. So likewise, if you're earning income, generating income from rent to rent, but you have, say, a side business, you have a normal day job that's giving you income, if you're storing up your rent income, then you can very quickly then start to build the deposit towards a property. Now, if we assess that let's say you were somebody who was very tenacious, like I said at the beginning, I only at any point had 7 rent to rent, right? Rent to rent serviced accommodation. And as you can see from the numbers, I didn't, for my own, different people have different strategies. My core strategy was investment. Rent to rent was always the secondary strategy. So I didn't need to go big like that. So I know people that have 60 or 40 rent to rents, depending on how they structured it with HMOs and with serviced accommodations. And so those people will be able to buy a house very quickly, because with the income I was earning from my 7 properties, I was able to still contribute towards purchasing a property. Now you imagine that if you have even 20 rent to rents, within 2 years, you should be able to get the deposit to be able to buy your own property. So it's about finding the right property in the right area. But if we were going to be realistic, if you had 5 rent to rents and you were generally earning 1,000 each from those properties net, then just do the math. So 5,000 per month. Let's say you on average you get about 4,000 times 12. That's about 50K. 2 years, you have 100K. So if you wanted to buy in Birmingham, for instance, 50K, you should be able to get you a property in Birmingham. Want to buy in London, 2 years, you should be able to get a property in London. So that's the way rent to rent can scale up your business to be able to actually purchase property.
Thank you. Someone here would like you to stress a bit more about crowdfunding, especially for newbies to the business.
Yes, so I do talk about crowdfunding in my webinar, because I couldn't talk about all of the different strategies. And crowdfunding in particular is an exciting option now for newbies. And one of the reasons why crowdfunding works is those people that don't want anything that's high, like a lot of these strategies we're talking about require your involvement. They're not as passive as people would lead you to believe. HMOs are definitely not passive income. Service accommodation, definitely not. But with crowdfunding, it's very passive in that you just need to find a deal and then you make it work. And so crowdfunding is increasingly becoming the way that property investors like myself then generate income. So, and when I say generate income, I mean income for the investment side of the deal. So we know we're going to be able to get the debt from the bank. So we then tie it with crowdfunding on the equity side. So that is increasingly becoming very popular. It's always existed, but more so now, because more people don't want their funds to be sitting in the banks when they can be earning 8 or 9 or 10%. So crowdfunding, I cover it as a strategy. It's not one of the ones I did here, but I cover it as a strategy on the on the webinar, but it's a good strategy for light touch, low impact investing.
Thank you. We are quickly running out of time. We have a couple of questions left. What prospect does the property market present in the next 6 to 12 months, considering unemployment rate that may follow after all the government incentives, SDT, etc.?
Yes. So, and that's why I had the slide that spoke about investing in this post-pandemic era. Because for me, the property market over the next 6 to 12 months, whilst one doesn't have a crystal ball and you can't really predict, you need to think about what the fallout of all of these. So a lot of people right now, the reason that there's a frenzy to buy is because a lot of people have cash right now. So quite a lot of businesses have gotten a lot of incentives from the government. And then with the stamp duty, so when I heard the stamp duty announcement, I was like, oh my God, I understand that the government is trying to ease things, but this seemed a step too far. But that's for property, that's from an investment perspective. From people who want to get on the property ladder, it's a perfect, it's a good incentive that they've done. So, but what that means is that there's now a crunch in the market right now, in that there are not enough properties on the market to warrant the prices that these properties are being charged for. So, like I said, with the auctions now, a lot of property prices, I was given an example of a property that I purchased last year. That property that I gave the example of 400, a smaller property in the auction just 2 weeks ago sold for £40,000 more. And that's because there's fewer stock in the market right now. And because there's little stock in the market, there's a lot of pressure and a lot of demand for the few stocks, that especially in choice locations. So over the next 6 to 12 months, I'm watching to see what's going to happen once, jobs start to come. Like once all of these ease off, then the job losses start to hit. And this is why I said having a cash reserve, especially as a property investor, is very important, because it's not unforeseeable that you won't be able to get your tenants out. And those tenants will be either not paying rent because they've lost their jobs. And these are standard tenants that would have passed any normal rental criteria or scrutiny. But because the fundamentals are completely different in the next couple of months, we just don't know how it's going to play out. So my hope is that, all of the government palliatives and everything they've done meets us, because the reason why they're doing it is they're trying to flood the market with cash so that it will keep the market going until we pick it up. It's almost like you're trying to jumpstart a car, and you're hoping that the businesses will be able to pick up and then take off, and then they can start to tax us back. But if that doesn't work, and then we start to see the flip side happen, you need to protect. And this is what I say about protecting against downside risk. You need to protect against what the fallout could be on the side. So I am watching. I'll still take a deal if it works, but I'm not in a hurry to invest until I see how all of this plays out.
Thank you very much. Those are the questions we can take for now. Over to you, Eve.
Wow. They say how time flies when we are having fun. But I would say how time flies when we are learning so much. That was awesome. Dolapo, thank you so much. I personally have learned so much that I never imagined, could happen in the property business. Thank you, Dolapo. That was fantastic. Well, we've got to go. But before I let you all go, I'd like to say thank you to everyone that has joined us this evening. Thank you so much. I do apologize that we've slightly overrun, but I'm sure you will agree that it has well been worth it. Just like Osa said, watch out for our next masterclass on finance management. We'd like to thank the team that have worked so hard to bring you this webinar this evening. Like I said, thank you, Dolapo. We thank our team leader, KC. Thank you, Akiwande. Thank you, Osa. Thank you, Neo. Thank you, Ifweko. And of course, we'd like to say thank you to our pastor, Pastor Shegun Gilbert, for agreeing to let us organize this event. We'd like to thank Onelondon Retro Church. If you have any information, any feedback that you would have for us, just pop us an email at info@onelondon.co. Someone will put it in the chat for you. And for all the questions that we have been unable to answer, of course, get in touch with Dolapo. Her information will also put in the chat for you. We'd also like you to follow us on Instagram at One London Retro and on Facebook at One London Retro. Once again, thank you so much. Look out for all our updates on our next webinar, which is on finance management. And until we come your way again, thank you so much for joining us. Do have yourself a wonderful evening, and most important, do keep safe. Goodbye.
Thank you.